Did a crown truly offer protection when the final summons arrived? Could untold wealth and power purchase even a moment more on earth? What did the most formidable women of 1,000 years whisper in their very last moments? The medieval period, from the 5th century through the 15th century, saw queens rise to heights of power and influence, often navigating treacherous courts and brutal conflicts. Their lives were grand sagas filled with triumphs, tragedies, and secrets. When their time came to an end, often in lavish chambers or grim prisons, their final words, whether recorded by a scribe, a grieving loved one, or a watchful enemy, carried the weight of their extraordinary reigns. Number 10. The Dying Empress's Humble Request. The Empress Matilda, a woman, forged in the crucible of ambition and endless war, drew her final breaths in a secluded abbey in Rouen. Her life had been a tempest, a ceaseless struggle to reclaim the English throne she believed was hers by right. Daughter of King Henry I of England, wife to a Holy Roman Emperor, and mother to a future King Henry II, she had spent decades locked in a bitter civil war against her cousin Stephen. The conflict, known as the Anarchy, tore England apart, leaving a trail of devastation and unfulfilled promises. Matilda was a figure of formidable will, a woman who commanded armies and defied expectations, in an age when female rule was often met with suspicion and outright hostility. She had been crowned Empress in her youth, a title that carried immense prestige but little comfort during her later struggles for England. Her attempts to solidify her rule in London had been met with fierce resistance from the city's populace, forcing her to flee amidst a hail of stones and insults. She once escaped capture, dressed as a corpse, highlighting the desperate measures she often had to employ. Later, she escaped another siege by crossing frozen rivers in a daring nighttime flight. Despite her tenacity and brilliant political maneuvering, the English crown eluded her grasp. Ultimately, it was her son Henry who would secure the peace and claim the throne, building upon the foundations his mother had painstakingly laid. As her long life neared its end, the fires of ambition that had driven her for so long began to dim. She was no longer battling for kingdoms, but preparing for a different kind of journey. She had retired to Notre-Dame-de-Pré, a small Benedictine priory near Rouen, a place of peace after so much turmoil. The year was 1167. Outside the quiet walls of the abbey, the world continued its ceaseless turning. But for Matilda, the great drama of her life was reaching its final scene. Her son, Henry, was now King of England, a living testament to her enduring legacy and the strength of her lineage. The once mighty Empress, whose name had struck fear into the hearts of rivals and inspired loyalty in her followers, now lay in a simple monastic cell. Her attendants, nuns, and perhaps a few loyal servants gathered around her, their faces etched with grief. The power and pomp of her imperial past had stripped away, leaving only a woman reflecting on a life lived fully, if not always successfully, in her own immediate goals. With a voice that was barely a whisper, a voice that had once commanded armies and held sway in royal councils, she delivered her final pronouncement. It was not a grand political statement or a defiant curse against her enemies. It was a request simple and profoundly reflective of her ultimate humility. In the face of eternity, "I wish to be buried in this church," she stated, her breath catching with the effort, "and this epitaph placed upon my tomb. Here lies Henry I's daughter, wife of Henry V, mother of Henry II, who had the virtues of the powerful." Her words were a stark summary of a life defined by power and strife, a poignant acknowledgement of her failure to secure the English throne directly, but also a quiet assertion of her enduring royal connections and the sheer force of her character. The silence in the chamber was heavy after her last words, a quiet acceptance of a turbulent life's end. Number 9. The Holy Queen's Final Communion. Elizabeth of Hungary, a woman known more for her boundless compassion and spiritual devotion than for worldly power, lived a life that would eventually earn her sainthood. Born a princess of Hungary in 1207, she was destined from childhood for a political marriage, wedded at a young age to Louis IV, Landgrave of Thuringia. Despite the conventional nature of her union, their marriage blossomed into one of genuine love and mutual respect. Elizabeth, however, felt a profound call to serve the poor and the sick, a devotion that sometimes clashed with the expectations of her royal court. She regularly gave alms, visited hospitals, and personally tended to lepers, often drawing criticism from courtiers who viewed her actions as undignified for a lady of her standing. She was known for her simple attire and her disinterest in luxury, preferring to spend her wealth on those less fortunate. Her husband, Louis, remarkably supported her charitable endeavors, even defending her from the criticisms of his family. Their life together was a brief, tender interlude. Tragedy struck in 1227 when Louis died while on crusade, leaving Elizabeth a widow at the tender age of 20. Her world collapsed. Grief-stricken and facing hostility from her late husband's family, who resented her charitable spending and ascetic lifestyle, Elizabeth was forced to leave the Wartburg Castle, her marital home. She was even for a time denied access to her own children. Stripped of her earthly comforts and royal protection, she embraced an even more rigorous life of poverty and religious devotion. She became a tertiary of the Franciscan order, a layperson committed to the Franciscan rule and dedicated herself entirely to caring for the poor. She used her dowry to build a hospital in Marburg, where she personally ministered to the sick, living in a small, humble dwelling nearby. Her days were spent in prayer, fasting, and tireless service to the needy, often performing the most menial and unpleasant tasks with profound humility. As the autumn of 1231 deepened, Elizabeth's health began to fail. Her relentless asceticism and constant work had taken a toll on her frail body. She fell gravely ill, weakened by fever and exhaustion. As word spread of her deteriorating condition, the people of Marburg, whom she had served with such dedication, flocked to her humble home, offering prayers and expressing their deep sorrow. Inside her small chamber, far removed from the grandeur of her birth or the fleeting comfort of her royal marriage, Elizabeth lay on her bed, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Her spiritual director, Conrad of Marburg, and her devoted handmaidens were by her side. Their faces filled with concern. There was no grand ceremony or state funeral planning. Instead, the focus was entirely on her spiritual readiness for death. As the end drew near, Elizabeth asked for a final communion, a last reception of the Eucharist. Priest administered the sacrament, and a deep peace settled over her. With her final strength, she turned her thoughts completely to her faith, embracing the moment not with fear, but with serene acceptance. She had spent her life preparing for this moment, living a life of utter devotion and self-sacrifice. Her last words were not a plea for life, nor a reflection on her earthly accomplishments, but a direct address to the divine, a final act of worship. "Lord, I commend my spirit into thy hands," she murmured. Her voice soft but clear, her gaze fixed on something beyond the walls of her room. She passed away shortly after, her face reportedly radiating a sublime peace. Her death, while tragic for those who loved her, was seen by many as the culmination of a life lived in direct imitation of Christ, and her subsequent canonization as a saint solidified her legacy as a paragon of Christian charity. Number 8. The Queen Regent's Dying Instructions. Blanche of Castile. A woman who ruled France not once but twice as regent, was a force of nature in the 13th century. Born in 1188, granddaughter of Eleanor of Aquitaine, she inherited a formidable intellect and a resolute will. She married Louis VIII of France, a union that solidified the bond between the French and Castilian royal houses. When Louis died prematurely in 1226, leaving behind a young son, the future Louis IX, France faced a crisis. Blanche stepped forward, becoming regent for her 12-year-old heir. Her regency was no easy task. She faced rebellious barons' attempts by English monarchs to reclaim lost territories, and the ongoing Albigensian crusade in the south of France. Blanche proved herself an astute politician and a skilled military strategist. She quelled rebellions, negotiated treaties, and secured the stability of the Capetian dynasty. Her strong hand and sharp mind brought order to a fractured kingdom. She was also a devout Catholic, and her piety influenced her policies. And her upbringing of her son, who would later be canonized as Saint Louis. Her first regency lasted for 8 years, guiding Louis IX into adulthood and overseeing his coronation. Even after Louis took full control, Blanche remained a powerful influence, his trusted advisor and confidant. Her second regency began in 1248, when Louis IX, driven by deep religious conviction, embarked on the Seventh Crusade to the Holy Land. Blanche, now in her late 50s, once again took up the reins of power, ruling France in her son's absence. This regency was marked by renewed challenges, including a peasant uprising known as the Shepherd's Crusade, which she dealt with decisively. Despite her immense strength and unwavering resolve, the strain of governance and the constant anxieties for her absent son took a toll on her health. The news of Louis's capture in Egypt during the Crusade, though he was later released, deeply distressed her. She grieved for the losses suffered by the French army and worried ceaselessly about the safety of her beloved son. As 1252 drew to a close, Blanche fell gravely ill. She was at Melun, near Paris, when her health rapidly declined. The weight of her responsibilities, the ceaseless political machinations, and the profound worry for her son had finally worn down her formidable constitution. The chamber was filled with grieving courtiers, anxious advisors, and devoted clergy, all aware that a titan of medieval governance was nearing her end. Despite her suffering, Blanche maintained her composure and her sharp intellect. Her thoughts remained focused on the well-being of France and the spiritual path she had always strived to follow. She made meticulous arrangements for her burial, requesting to be interred at Maubuisson Abbey, a Cistercian convent she had founded and cherished. As her final moments approached, her voice grew faint, but her words carried the clarity and authority that had defined her reign. She had a final instruction for those gathered around her, a directive that underscored her unwavering commitment to her faith and her role as a spiritual guardian of the realm. "My body is to be buried at Maubuisson," she said, her voice a mere whisper. "But my heart I give to the Abbey of Lys." The gesture was symbolic, a separation of her physical remains from her deepest spiritual devotion, indicating that her heart, the core of her being, belonged to God and to the Church. Her death marked the end of an era of strong, effective regency, and her son, Louis IX, upon his return from the Crusade, mourned her deeply, recognizing the profound impact she had had on his life and on the stability of France. Number 7. The beloved Queen's peaceful farewell. Philippa of Hainaut, Queen of England and wife of Edward III, was a figure of immense popularity and quiet strength during the tumultuous 14th century. Born around 1314 in modern-day Belgium, she was chosen to marry the young English king in 1328, a match intended to solidify political alliances. Unlike many royal marriages of the era, Philippa and Edward's union blossomed into a genuine partnership, characterized by deep affection and mutual respect. She was not only the mother of their 14 children, including the renowned Black Prince, but also a trusted advisor and a calming presence at court. Philippa was celebrated for her kindness, piety, and generosity. She often interceded on behalf of petitioners, famously saving the lives of the burghers of Calais during the 100 Years' War. Her gentle nature stood in stark contrast to the often brutal realities of medieval warfare and politics. While her husband led armies in France, Philippa frequently acted as regent, demonstrating a quiet but firm hand in governance. She was also a patron of learning, notably supporting the establishment of Queen's College, Oxford. Throughout her life, she maintained a reputation for wisdom and compassion, endearing herself not only to her husband but also to the English people. As the years passed, Philippa's health began to decline. The relentless demands of motherhood, repeated childbirth, and the strain of managing a vast royal household took their toll. By 1369, she was gravely ill, suffering from a debilitating illness that confined her to her bed. Her husband, Edward III, who had loved her deeply throughout their long marriage, was devastated by her failing health. He spent countless hours by her side at Windsor Castle, a testament to their enduring bond. The grand royal apartments, usually bustling with courtiers and political intrigue, were filled with a profound silence broken only by the hushed whispers of attendants and the heavy breathing of the dying queen. As her final moments approached, Philippa remained lucid and composed. Her faith, which had always been a cornerstone of her life, offered her immense comfort. She had lived a life of grace and duty, fulfilling her roles as queen, mother, and patron with unwavering dedication. Now she was preparing for her spiritual journey. With her beloved husband holding her hand, his face etched with sorrow, she turned her gaze towards him. Her words, spoken softly, were not of earthly concerns or political power, but of final wishes, both personal and deeply spiritual, revealing her enduring character and her profound connection to her family and her faith. "I ask you to keep my body in safety until I am buried," she began, her voice weak but clear, "and pay all my debts that I owe in England and abroad, and that you fulfill all my bequests," she continued, her voice gaining a little strength, a final plea that underscored her piety and concern for the less fortunate, "and that you grant to all my servants who have served me faithfully their wages and more." Her final words were a testament to her meticulous nature and her deep concern for others, even in the face of death. Edward was overcome with grief, weeping openly as she spoke. He promised to fulfill her every wish. She passed away shortly after, leaving a void that would be felt deeply by the king and the entire kingdom. Her death marked the end of a golden era for Edward III, and her memory would long be cherished as one of England's most beloved queens. Number 6. The Uncrowned Queen's Silent Farewell. Catherine de Valois, born a French princess, in 1401, found her destiny intertwined with the ambitions of the English crown. She became Queen of England through her marriage to the formidable Henry V, a union sealed by the Treaty of Troyes in 1420. This treaty, a culmination of Henry's stunning military victories in France, aimed to make him heir to the French throne and unite the two warring kingdoms under an English monarch. Catherine's marriage was a political triumph for England, but her time as queen was short-lived. Henry V, a warrior, king of immense charisma and military prowess, died suddenly in 1422, just 2 years after their wedding. He left behind a 9-month-old infant son, also named Henry, who became King of England, and by the terms of the treaty, the claimant to the French throne. Catherine, now a young widow, found herself in a precarious position. She was the Queen Mother, but her French heritage made her a subject of suspicion, and her youth made her vulnerable in the cutthroat English court. Powerful English Regency Council for her infant son kept a close watch on her. Fearing any attempts to secure her own power or influence, she was effectively sidelined from political life. In the years following Henry V's death, Catherine sought solace and perhaps a measure of personal freedom. She embarked on a secret relationship with Owen Tudor, a Welsh squire who served in her household. Their union, though never officially recognized as a marriage due to its clandestine nature and the potential political scandal, resulted in several children. This relationship, a daring act of personal rebellion against the constraints of her royal widowhood, would later become the foundation of the powerful Tudor dynasty, the very lineage that would eventually seize the English throne. However, at the time, it was a source of great personal risk and potential shame. The English council, learning of her relationship and the birth of her children, took action to isolate her, further passing a statute that made it treason for a queen dowager to marry without the king's consent. This effectively made her relationship with Owen Tudor illegal and dangerous. Catherine was forced to separate from Owen, who was imprisoned several times. Her children, with him, including Edmund Tudor, the future father of Henry VII, were taken into the care of others. By 1437, Catherine's health began to fail. She was staying at Bermondsey Abbey, a quiet retreat perhaps, seeking spiritual comfort and peace away from the watchful eyes of the court and the echoes of her controversial past. The world outside her chamber was still consumed by the ongoing 100 Years' War and the political maneuvering for control of her son, King Henry VI. But for Catherine, the battles were over. Her life had been one of political necessity, brief glory, and then a quiet, unacknowledged personal love. As her final moments approached, she was attended by devoted servants and members of her household, including perhaps a few of her own children from her union with Owen Tudor. Her life had been a mixture of royal duty and personal defiance. Now, as the end drew near, Catherine's final expressions were not grand pronouncements or political statements. They were reportedly silent, a testament to her quiet strength and the profound privacy she had been forced to adopt in her later years. She passed away on January 3, 1437, without recorded words, leaving behind a complex legacy that would only be fully appreciated with the rise of her Tudor descendants. Her silence in death perhaps spoke volumes about a life lived under constant scrutiny and constraint, a quiet defiance of the expectations placed upon a medieval queen. Number 5. The accused queen's final testament. Joanna of Navarre, a queen of both France and England, navigated a life fraught with political intrigue, personal loss, and even accusations of witchcraft. Born in 1373, she was the daughter of Charles II of Navarre, a king known as Charles the Bad for his treacherous dealings. Joanna's early life saw her deeply involved in the politics of her native Navarre and Brittany, where she served as regent for her young son. In 1403, after the death of her first husband, she made a momentous decision. She married King Henry IV of England, becoming his second queen. This union was intended to strengthen ties between England and Brittany, and Joanna embraced her new role with dignity and a keen understanding of courtly life. She was a stepmother to the future Henry V and shared a close relationship with him. However, her life as queen was not without its shadows. Henry IV's reign was marked by rebellions and financial difficulties, and Joanna often used her own extensive wealth to support the crown. When Henry IV died in 1413, Joanna, now Queen Dowager, continued to reside in England, maintaining her position and influence, but the political climate grew increasingly hostile towards foreigners and specifically towards her. In 1419, during the reign of her stepson, Henry V, Joanna faced a shocking and terrifying accusation. She was charged with using witchcraft and sorcery to harm the king. The accusations were likely politically motivated, a pretext to seize her considerable wealth and remove a powerful dowager queen from the political landscape during a period of intense war with France. She was stripped of her possessions and imprisoned first at Pevensey Castle and later at Leeds Castle. For several years, Joanna endured confinement, separated from her remaining family, and stripped of her royal dignity. Despite the gravity of the charges, no conclusive proof of witchcraft was ever presented. Her stepson, Henry V, eventually recognized the injustice and ordered her release in 1422, shortly before his own death. Joanna was restored to her properties and lived out her later years in honorable retirement, residing at various royal manors, including Havering-atte Bower in Essex. She lived a long life for the medieval period, reaching the age of 64. As the year 1437 drew to a close, Joanna's health began to fail. She had outlived her husband and many of her children. Her final days were spent in quiet reflection, perhaps contemplating the extraordinary twists and turns of her life, from a princess of Navarre to a duchess to a queen of England, and then to an accused witch only to regain her freedom and dignity. She had endured the loss of a husband, the political machinations of a foreign court, and the grave calumny of witchcraft. As she lay on her deathbed, attended by her household, the weight of her long and eventful life settled upon her. Her final moments were marked by a clear desire to settle her affairs and ensure her spiritual readiness. She dictated her will, a crucial document for a medieval noble, ensuring that her extensive personal wealth was distributed to her household, her children, and to various religious institutions for the good of her soul. Her last words were not a spoken utterance in the final gasp, but a carefully considered written testament that encapsulated her final wishes and her devotion. In her will, she made provisions for her burial in Canterbury Cathedral, alongside her beloved husband, King Henry IV, a powerful assertion of her legitimate status as Queen of England, despite the earlier attempts to discredit her. Her will also contained a poignant request, a final act of spiritual devotion, and a plea for remembrance. She requested that her body be dressed in the habit of St. Francis, a symbolic gesture of humility and piety, and that prayers be said for her soul. This formal declaration, carefully written and witnessed, served as her final statement to the world, a lasting testament to her faith and her identity as Queen of England, a status she had fought to protect throughout her life, even against the most outrageous accusations. Number 4. The tragic Queen's last defiance. Margaret of Anjou, Queen of England, was a figure of legendary determination and resilience, whose life was inextricably bound to the tumultuous Wars of the Roses. In the 15th century, born a French princess in 1430, she married the gentle, pious, and ultimately ineffective King Henry VI of England. In 1445, from the outset, Margaret found herself thrust into a deeply divided court, navigating the bitter rivalries between powerful noble factions. As her husband's mental health deteriorated and his grip on the throne weakened, Margaret became the de facto leader of the Lancastrian cause, fiercely defending her son's right to the succession against the rival House of York. Margaret? She was a formidable political operator, a brilliant strategist, and a passionate advocate for her husband and son. She raised armies, led her forces into battle, and fought with an unyielding spirit that earned her the respect and fear of her enemies. She endured exile, returned to reclaim her throne, suffered devastating military defeats, and witnessed the brutal deaths of her allies and loved ones. Her life was a relentless cycle of conflict, hope, and despair. Her son, Edward, Prince of Wales, was her driving force, and his future was the prize for which she waged relentless war. The final crushing blow came in 1471. The Battle of Tewkesbury saw the decisive defeat of the Lancastrian army. Her son Edward was killed, ending her dynastic hopes forever. Henry VI, already a prisoner, died shortly after, likely murdered. Margaret, now a captive of the victorious Yorkists, was brought before King Edward IV, her ultimate nemesis. The once powerful queen, who had defied him for so long, was now broken, stripped of her family and her cause. She was imprisoned first in the Tower of London and later in various castles. Her spirit finally subdued by the overwhelming weight of her losses, she was held for 5 years, a shadow of her former self, a living symbol of the vanquished Lancastrian dream. In 1475, she was finally ransomed by King Louis XI of France, her cousin, who had initially arranged her ill-fated marriage. She returned to France, a queen without a kingdom, a mother without a son, an exile. She spent her final years in quiet obscurity, far from the political stage where she had once commanded so much power. She resided in Anjou, the land of her birth, a place of peace after so much conflict. She was no longer plotting battles or rallying troops. Her days were spent in reflection, perhaps in prayer, and undoubtedly in grieving for all that she had lost. As 1482 drew to a close, Margaret, now in her early 50s, fell ill at her residence, the Château de Dampierre. The relentless physical and emotional toll of her life, the constant betrayals and battles, the unspeakable grief had finally worn her down. Her passing was not a public spectacle, but a private one, attended by a few devoted servants. Her final moments were marked not by defiance, for the fight was long over, but by a poignant resignation, a quiet acceptance of a destiny that had led her from royal grandeur to utter desolation. As her breath grew shallow and her strength faded, she reflected on her life, stripped of all its worldly power and pomp. Her last words were not a direct instruction or a dramatic utterance, but a testament to her enduring spirit, a quiet acknowledgement of the ultimate surrender to her fate. Spoken to her closest attendants, "I am weary of life," she murmured, her voice faint, "and desire nothing but to die." These words, simple and profound, encapsulated the exhaustion and profound sorrow of a queen who had fought with unmatched ferocity, only to lose everything she held dear. She died shortly after leaving behind a legacy of unparalleled courage and tragic loss, a queen whose life truly embodied the brutal drama of the Wars of the Roses. Number 3. The Woodville Queen's Last Will. Elizabeth Woodville, Queen of England and wife of King Edward IV, lived a life that resembled a dramatic medieval romance, filled with sudden elevation, profound joy, and ultimate tragedy. Born into a lesser noble family in 1437, her marriage to the young, dashing Yorkist king in 1464 was a scandalous and utterly unexpected affair. Edward secretly married her, a commoner and a widow with 2 sons, without the knowledge or consent of his powerful cousin, the Earl of Warwick, known as the Kingmaker. This marriage, a defiant act of love and passion, shattered political alliances and plunged England further into the chaos of the Wars of the Roses. Elizabeth's ascent to queen triggered fierce resentment from the old nobility who viewed her and her numerous family as upstarts, ambitious and grasping. Yet for a time she enjoyed immense power and prestige as queen, bearing Edward several children, including the 2 young sons who would become famously known as the Princes in the Tower. Her reign was marked by shifting fortunes, periods of exile, and fierce battles for the throne. She saw her husband briefly deposed, and then triumphantly restored. But it was after Edward IV's sudden death in 1483 that Elizabeth's life descended into its deepest despair. Her young son, Edward V, was proclaimed king, but his reign was swiftly and brutally cut short. His uncle Richard III seized the throne, declaring Elizabeth's marriage to Edward invalid and her children illegitimate. 2 sons, the young King Edward V and his brother Richard, Duke of York, were confined to the Tower of London and vanished, their fate a mystery that continues to haunt history. Elizabeth sought sanctuary in Westminster Abbey, fiercely protecting her daughters, including the future Elizabeth of York. She lived through Richard III's brief, tyrannical reign, the dramatic Battle of Bosworth Field, where he was killed, and the ascent of Henry Tudor, the man who would become Henry VII, to the throne. Her eldest daughter, Elizabeth of York, married Henry VII, uniting the warring houses of York and Lancaster and establishing the Tudor dynasty. This marriage brought peace to England, but it did not bring full restoration for Elizabeth Woodville. She eventually left court, moving to Bermondsey Abbey, a cloister, in 1487. The reasons for her departure are debated. Was it a forced retirement by her son-in-law, a deliberate choice for spiritual solace, or a consequence of her declining health and emotional exhaustion? By then she had witnessed the death of her husband, the disappearance of her beloved sons, and the political downfall of her family. Her life had been one of extreme highs and devastating lows. As 1492 arrived, Elizabeth's health failed rapidly. She was at Bermondsey Abbey, a place of quiet contemplation, far from the royal courts and the political machinations that had defined her life. She had outlived many of her contemporaries and saw her daughter on the throne, a legacy of her own. Her final days were spent in quiet reflection, possibly in prayer, as she prepared for her ultimate journey. Her Last words were not a single spoken utterance in her final moments, but a carefully crafted document, her last will and testament, which she dictated on April 10, 1492, just before her death. This will serve as her final public declaration, a poignant reflection of her life's trials and her enduring concerns. In it, she requested a simple burial expressing her humility in death. She also made provisions for her personal belongings, distributing them among her children and trusted servants. Her most famous lines from this will, however, are a testament to her profound losses and her acceptance of her fate. She declared herself a simple woman and entrusted her soul to God, acknowledging the temporary nature of earthly glory. Her will is devoid of grand pronouncements or political statements. Instead, it is a testament to a woman who had endured much, a queen who had lost everything, and who faced her end with a quiet dignity, seeking only spiritual peace. This formal statement, signed and sealed, served as her final words to the world, a poignant echo of a life lived on the precipice of power and sorrow. Number 2. The Last Will of a Warrior Queen. Isabella of Castile, a towering figure who redefined the role of a medieval queen, died in 1504, marking the very end of the medieval era and the dawn of a new age. Born in 1451, her early life was precarious, marked by the political instability of Castile and the machinations of her half-brother, King Henry IV. Despite being overlooked and underestimated, Isabella possessed an iron will, a sharp intellect, and an unshakable faith. Her marriage to Ferdinand of Aragon in 1469 was a bold political move, uniting the two most powerful kingdoms of the Iberian Peninsula and laying the foundation for modern Spain. Together, Ferdinand and Isabella, known as the Catholic monarchs, embarked on a gating reign. They completed the Reconquista, conquering the last Moorish stronghold of Granada in 1492, ending centuries of Muslim rule in Spain. This same year, they famously sponsored Christopher Columbus's voyage across the Atlantic, an event that would reshape world history. Isabella was far more than a king's consort. She was an equal partner in power, making crucial decisions on war, diplomacy, and governance. She reformed the legal system, strengthened the royal authority, and fostered intellectual and artistic life. Her devotion to Catholicism was profound, leading to both the religious fervor of the Inquisition and the support for vast missionary efforts. Her reign was one of unprecedented expansion and consolidation of power, establishing Spain as a major European force. However, her later years were marked by profound personal tragedy. She suffered the deaths of her only son and heir, John, her eldest daughter, Isabella, and then her daughter's son, Miquel, who was meant to inherit both Castile and Aragon. The deaths of her heirs left her succession in doubt, with her third daughter, Joanna, who suffered from mental illness as the only remaining heir. The immense responsibility of her kingdom, coupled with the crushing weight of her personal losses, took a heavy toll on Isabella's health. By the autumn of 1504, she was gravely ill, confined to her bed at Medina del Campo. Her body was failing, but her mind remained clear and sharp, ever focused on the future of her beloved Castile. She understood the precariousness of the succession and the need to ensure a stable transfer of power. As the end drew near, her chamber was filled with the most powerful figures in Spain: her husband Ferdinand, her daughter Joanna, her son-in-law Philip the Handsome, and various advisors and noblemen. The atmosphere was somber, heavy with the knowledge that a monumental reign was drawing to a close. Isabella, ever the meticulous ruler, spent her final days dictating her will, a document that spanned many pages and addressed every aspect of her kingdom's future. It was not merely a personal testament, but a comprehensive political roadmap, outlining her wishes for the succession, the governance of Castile, the administration of the newly discovered lands in the Americas, and the ongoing religious policy. Her last words, were thus embodied in this extraordinary document, a testament to her unwavering commitment to her legacy and her kingdom. Among the many clauses, she made specific pronouncements about the treatment of the native populations in the New World, advocating for their fair treatment and conversion, a blend of religious zeal and nascent concern for human rights. She meticulously outlined the powers of her husband, Ferdinand, as regent for Joanna, and instructed Joanna on her duties as queen. In a poignant clause that reflected her lifelong devotion, she also made provisions for her own burial, requesting a simple interment at the Alhambra in Granada, the last stronghold she had reconquered. This long, detailed will, signed and sealed just days before her death on November 26, 1504, served as her final powerful communication to her kingdom and to history. It was a testament to her vision, her faith, and her unwavering dedication to the destiny of Spain, a final monumental act of governance by one of the most influential queens of all time. Number 1. The Lioness's Last Prayer. Eleanor of Aquitaine, a woman who lived for over 80 years in the 12th century, was arguably the most powerful and influential woman of the entire medieval period. Born in 1122, she inherited the vast and wealthy Duchy of Aquitaine at a young age, making her one of the most desirable heiresses in Europe. She was Queen of France through her marriage to Louis VII, and later Queen of England through her marriage to Henry II. Her first marriage was annulled, a rare and daring feat for a queen, and she then married Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and Anjou, who soon became King of England. Their union, though passionate, was fraught with conflict, especially as their many sons grew and rebelled against their father, often with Eleanor's covert support. For many years, she endured imprisonment at Henry II's command, a testament to his fear of her political influence. Upon Henry's death, her favorite son, Richard I, known as the Lionheart, ascended the throne and immediately released her. Despite being in her late 60s, Eleanor returned to political life with remarkable vigor, acting as regent for Richard while he was on crusade, and later raising his ransom when he was captured. She traveled across Europe, negotiating alliances, securing her son's release, and ensuring the stability of the Angevin Empire. After Richard's death, she supported her youngest son John as he struggled to maintain control of the vast continental territories. Her life was a tapestry of royal courts, political intrigue, military campaigns, and fierce family loyalties. She was a patron of the arts, a brilliant diplomat, and a shrewd politician, a woman who truly shaped the course of European history. By the early 1200s, Eleanor was well into her 80s, an astonishing age for the era. The vast Angevin Empire, which she had helped build and defend, was crumbling under King John's ineffective rule. She had witnessed the deaths of nearly all her children, including her beloved Richard. Though her physical strength was diminishing, her mind remained sharp. She retired to Fontefraud Abbey, a vast monastic complex in Anjou, where she had long been a patron and where many members of her family were already buried, including Henry II and Richard the Lionheart. It was a place of spiritual solace and dynastic remembrance. As 1204 dawned, Eleanor's life was drawing to a close. She was surrounded by the quiet rhythm of monastic life, and perhaps a few devoted attendants. The world outside continued its wars and power struggles, but for Eleanor, those battles were now distant echoes. She had fought her last political skirmish, made her last grand journey, and delivered her last piece of strategic advice. Her final moments were not dramatic in the way her life had been, but they were deeply profound. She had lived a life of immense power, controversy, and enduring faith. Her final act was a spiritual preparation, a surrender to a higher power, after a life of relentless human striving. Her body, once so full of vitality, was now frail, but her spirit remained unyielding. As her breath grew shallow and those around her knew the end was near, Eleanor's focus turned entirely to the divine. Her last words were not a lament for her lost power or a final command, but a simple, heartfelt prayer, an act of devout submission that reflected her enduring faith, a cornerstone of her life, despite all its worldly complexities. With her last strength, she whispered a plea for divine mercy and guidance, a final appeal to the ultimate authority. "Lord, I commend my spirit into thy hands," she murmured, her voice almost imperceptible, a direct echo of Christ's own words on the cross, demonstrating her deep piety and acceptance of her impending death. These words, simple and profound, were the final utterance of a queen who had lived a life of extraordinary reach and influence, a testament to her spiritual preparation for the journey beyond, and a powerful conclusion to one of history's most magnificent lives. She passed away shortly after joining her family in the hallowed grounds of Fontevraud, her legacy secured as the formidable queen who had truly lived 1,000 lives in one.